Good morning. My name is Michelle Kane, and when Mr. Renshaw told us to pick a topic for our senior speech, I decided on a gap year, which is a break between your senior year of high school and your freshman year of college. But I figured that might be kind of boring since you don't really want to hear about it unless you're actually planning on doing it, so I was gonna switch. And I went to him and asked if I could talk about sandwiches because I like them. And he said no, so here we are. Let's talk about a gap year. I want to help people, and I know that sounds cliche, and it is, but it's still what I want to do. And there's this really cool program called The Leap that will help me do that. The Leap is a gap year program based out of the UK, and it's 100% legitimate. It's accredited by both the American Gap Association and the British equivalent of that called the Year Out Group. The Leap is also really cool because it lets you pick the type of work you want to do and the focus of that work. So, for example, I would pick volunteer work with environmental conservation at the core. That's helpful for me because that's what I want to do in college, and it will also help me get more specific with what exactly it is I want to study, since environmental is such a broad topic to begin with. I feel like this would also look really good on a college app because you send in your application, and on one side it says, here's all this really cool stuff that I got to do in high school, and then over here, by the way, I just spent the last 4 months working at an orphanage or working on a coral reef tagging fish. That's something that not a lot of people our age can say they've done, and so it makes you unique. Unfortunately, when most people hear the phrase gap year, they think of someone sitting on a couch for a year doing nothing. And if that's what you want to do, that's not a good plan for your life. That's just a waste of your time. You need to go to school. And that's not my definition of a gap year. Mine is a structured, well-planned year off of school. You could get a job to raise money for college, or travel the world before you dedicate the next 4 years of your life to more school. Or in my case, volunteer work. Now, for maturity's sake, and for my parents, I need to address the negative sides of this argument. This is a whole year off of school, and that's a lot. That's way more than anything we've ever done for the past 12 or more years. And it has the potential to be pretty difficult to adjust to, and even harder to adjust back into the routine of school after having done a whole year away. Although, I think it would serve more as a refresher so that you do well in school. There's also the very real issue of safety, especially for volunteer programs, because a lot of the countries that need the most help are also suffering from pretty severe political unrest or some really bad diseases, and that is something to consider. But you also have to look at whether or not you're willing to take those kinds of risks to do what you care about. There's also the issue of money, because in some cases, paying for a gap year can be almost as much as a 5th year of college, and that's a lot. But last year alone, the American Gap Association gave away over $2.5 million in scholarships to help students our age do what they wanted. And the Leap is really cool because 65% of the money you pay is actually used on work projects in the country you go to. And I would also say that the positives definitely outweigh the negatives in this argument. For example, students who have taken a gap year overwhelmingly report being more satisfied with their careers after college than those students who went straight from high school to college. And studies show that motivation for and interest in study is renewed, thus leading to students who've taken a gap year having higher GPAs. And in a study at the University of Northern California, students who took a gap year were compared to academically equivalent students who hadn't taken a gap year, and over all 4 years of college, those students who did a gap year had higher GPAs. The idea of a gap year is obviously not very common in America yet, but interest is growing. Since just 2006, gap year enrollment has increased by 600%. And in European countries like Denmark and Norway, over 50% of students already take a gap year. And that's not something to just brush aside, because both of those countries scored higher than the US on this huge international educational system study. And for me, I know this sounds cheesy, but it's one of those you miss 100% of the shots you don't take type of things. Because when people look back on their lives, rarely do they regret doing something, but a lot of the time you'll hear them regret having not done something. And I don't want this to be one of those things where I look back on my life in 40 years and regret not doing this because I was afraid. No regrets.